Owen's back for a business update. Hello again, Owen. Starting off with Apple shares surging, and that's after another record quarter's earning.
Yeah, that's right. They not only doubled the sales of the iPhone, Claire, they managed to confound all expectations once again, which is pretty much part of Apple's secret these days, keeping even the most bullish investors on their toes and delivering, as you say, more record numbers. The numbers are impressive, but for many analysts, me included, it's Apple's strategy perhaps that's even more noteworthy right now. Just as Apple did with tablet computing, it's now tearing up the rulebook on its market for smartphones. And it's now proving it can sell a high-end product where previously it was thought more budget operators ruled the roost. William Hildebrandt has the story.
It's already the world's most valuable company, and it continues to defy expectations. Apple's second quarter results surprised even the most bullish of investors. The company brought in $39.2 billion, a 59% spike in revenue, surpassing what most analysts had guessed by more than $2 billion. Driven by iPhone sales in China, Apple said it sold some 35 million units, almost doubling last year's level. While Apple's popularity continues to spread around the world, its competitor Nokia reported its smartphone sales were down more than 50%. The Finnish company thought it had a leg up on Apple in developing markets thanks to its full range of phones, nearly all of which are considerably cheaper than the iPhone. But the numbers tell a different story. Apple reported an $11.6 billion net income, Nokia a $1.2 billion loss. Apple's stellar figures are the latest example of how it turns conventional wisdom on its head.
Find me a store that sells organic mushrooms from Arizona.
Bringing high-end, high-cost retail to developing markets without missing a beat. Despite a recent redesign, iPad sales were below expectations. Apple is expected to unveil overhauled models of its laptops and desktops this summer.
Claire, do you think Samuel L. Jackson is the only person in the world that can make organic mushrooms, or that phrase sound cool?
I think he is. Whatever he says, he sounds cool.
Now, Claire asked me a moment ago if I had Apple shares. I don't, and here's partly why. They're simply out of my price range and probably out of most people's price range, unless you bought into them around 5 years ago. They've put on around $100 in value in the last few months alone, Claire. Currently, in after-hours trading up above $600 once again. They have been higher than that in the past couple of weeks. The record for Apple was just under $640, but you can see those results managed to load around 7% more value on Apple stock. It did dip slightly during the day's trading, but you can see in after-hours trading well up again. Let's continue with the markets. Take a look at the Asian markets. As you'd expect, Apple has driven a lot of positive sentiment this Wednesday. You can see the Nikkei up by around 0.8%. And the rest of the Asian markets are not far behind.
So Apple comes to the rescue of the markets for now, but of course we can't ignore what's happening across the Eurozone at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah. Wherever you look, really, we've got hotspots all over the place right now. The Dutch government, of course, resigning with Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister, now just a caretaker Prime Minister, trying to get some kind of cross-party support to get that budget, that all-important budget, on the books by the end of this month. We also had a bond sale in Spain on Tuesday. We saw borrowing costs for short-term debt doubling. And now, perhaps more worrying than anything else, is the Greek economy. Of course, the country we'd all quietly forgotten about with that second €130 billion bailout. Yesterday, the governor of the Central Bank of Greece admitted that the recession there this year will be far worse than first thought. The economy there will now contract by 5%. Add on top of that, more political uncertainty with elections coming up in just a few weeks. Here's the governor of the Central Bank of Greece.
If after the elections the slightest doubt is cast on the will of the new government and society to carry out the reform program, today's positive prospects will be reversed and the country will rapidly find itself in a particularly harmful situation with a negative effect on the psychology of the citizens.
So a dire forecast from Greece if the elections leave it in limbo. But at least we've got a bit of clarity here in France from François Hollande.
Yeah, just a little bit. The man who would be president of France, the socialist contender, as he's now campaigning for, of course, that second round in less than 2 weeks now. His camp have been briefing financial newswires and reporters about his intentions. Hollande remains, for many investors and for the markets, the man to fear right now. He declared himself as the self-styled enemy of finance. His advisors have been rowing back on that a little bit, perhaps predictable given that he's now so close to power and maybe faces the realities of office. We've got more clarity, as you say, Claire, on exactly what he stands to do. One of the things that Hollande said he wanted to do was renegotiate that treaty on budgets, the kind of thing that's got the Dutch government into trouble right now, bringing down budget deficits, the so-called fiscal compact. Hollande wants to renegotiate that so he can give France a little bit more breathing room to try and grow a little bit. His advisors are saying we're not talking about renegotiating that. What they want is some kind of coordinated growth strategy, the kind of thing that you would see decided in Brussels, simply to try and get these economies growing a little bit faster than they are now. One idea they've had is something they call project bonds. It's the idea that you and I might be able to invest in various projects, not just in France, but across the Eurozone, again, to try and stimulate growth a little bit.
All right, let's now take a look at a few more of the day's business stories. A former BP engineer has been arrested and charged with destroying evidence related to the Gulf of Mexico disaster. Kurt Mix is alleged to have destroyed texts that highlighted how much oil was leaking from the Deepwater Horizon rig. Mix, who left BP in January this year, was involved in the plugging of the wellhead leak. The disaster was the worst of its type in US history.
News Corp founder Rupert Murdoch is due back in front of British lawmakers later this Wednesday. Murdoch is making a second appearance at the phone hacking inquiry. That's a day after evidence from his son James suggested collusion with the UK government. It emerged that the Culture Minister had leaked confidential government information to James Murdoch to help News Corp mount a full takeover of satellite broadcaster B Sky B. News Corp had to abandon that bid when the phone hacking scandal broke last year.
And the Italian government has launched new low-cost bank accounts to offset the impact of new laws limiting cash transactions. The accounts are aimed at households with pensioners who receive around €1,500 per month. The government's trying to force people to use bank accounts while banning cash transactions above €1,000 to stop people avoiding VAT. It's estimated 850,000 pensioners in Italy don't have a bank account.
Now, is China, or China's car makers at least, missing a gear? The country's main auto show is in full swing in Beijing. China is now the world's biggest car market, but growth there is starting to plateau out somewhat. And that means that with hundreds of millions of cars due to hit the roads of China over the next decade, there's growing concern among car manufacturers that they might be left with a fleet of unsold cars. Henry Morton sent us this report.
China has the largest auto market in the world, and you can go one of two ways here, green or luxury. French car giant Citroën is looking at the latter by revamping an old favourite in the guise of the DS Numero 9, as it looks to gain more market share.
If you look at all the leather inside of a DS of 1955 or a DS23 of 1970, you'll find the same inspiration today in the DS9.
Foreign car makers are currently the dominant force in the Chinese auto market, where production could double in the next decade. But the party may soon be over. It's predicted that 200 million vehicles will be on China's roads by 2020, while at the same time cities like Beijing are limiting the number of new car registrations because of congestion.
In the midterm, because of the saturation in the big cities and because of a decrease in demand, it's actually possible that car sales will slow down in China, especially if production reaches 40 million in the next 10 to 15 years.
The large numbers of small domestic car makers means that widespread consolidation is expected in the industry. Without it, Chinese companies could become the losers in the world's largest auto market.
Beautiful, wasn't it, that DS Super we were just saying? What a classic car that is. I don't think the new one's a vast improvement. I think the DS Super was the car of General de Gaulle, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe if François Hollande does win that election, maybe he'll buy one. Presidential car.
We'll have to wait and see. Thank you very much, Owen, for that look at the day's business news. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Thomas Burgess Watson will have all the latest news in just a few minutes.
This week, the Environment team is using the French island of Corsica to investigate an almost invisible pollution choking the Mediterranean. Up to 250 billion fragments of plastic floating just beneath the water's surface.
Don't miss Environment. Today, 4:40 p.m. Paris time, on France 24.